This is fascinating. You've got to watch this. This was a clip unearthed of then Governor Bill Clinton, before he was even president, being asked about the situation with Israel and the Arabs and the Israeli-Arab conflict and the Israeli settlements and what's needed for peace. And I want to show you what he had to say about this back then, because it shows you how much the debate has shifted leftwards, hostile to Israel, unbalanced against Israel, biased against Israel. It's absolutely fascinating because so many of the talking points that we often encounter, the way a senior Democrat politician in America dealt with it back then is very different. Have a listen, because I think you're going to be surprised.
Governor, do you think Israel should stop building settlements on the West Bank?
I think that decision should not be enforced by the United States. I think that we ought to... I believe that Israel is now in peace talks with its Arab neighbors, and that settlements issue obviously has to be brought into those talks. And if there's going to be some peace agreement, obviously that's one of the main areas of leverage that Israel has to deal with. They want recognition. They want an end to the Arab boycott. They want some long-term guarantees of peace before they give up whatever they're doing in the disputed territories. And I think that what we ought to do now that the United States is instrumental in bringing the parties together is let them talk peace. I don't think we should publicly keep trying to deliver Israel to the Arab position in the peace talks. That's what I think.
Sir.
Okay, fine.
Wow, wow, wow. Do you understand how much things have shifted since then? And by the way, since that point, and Clinton tried to get a deal close to the table, and it was Arafat, it was the Arab side that walked away. And since then, Israel's continued to try to seek peace, but there's been terrorism, extremism, intifadas, October 7th. And yet somehow, even though they've shown themselves to be far more just about wanting to kill Jews, and it's been the anti-Semitism has been exposed, yet somehow the center of gravity has shifted even further away from Israel. Let's pick up on some of the things that he said there that are so different. First of all, we often hear from Western politicians them saying settlements have to stop, period. Here he's saying, it's not for me to enforce that. This is Israel's decision. Israel is a sovereign nation. And also, talking about all the problems and challenges she's facing, the hate she's facing, the boycotts and the hostility, he's saying let them use this issue for leverage. Instead, today we have politicians saying, well, settlements are wrong and they're unacceptable and they need to stop right now. Israel needs to freeze them right now, without any concessions being demanded of the other side. I mean, it just shows you, doesn't it, how different things are today. He also spoke about the fact that they are disputed territories. Goodness me, I don't recall hearing that these days with politicians. How refreshing. They are disputed territories. Right now, we hear often people talking about it as the occupied territories and illegal occupation, all these things. Clinton back then was using the correct legal terminology, and how refreshing to hear that. It is a disputed territory. I'm happy to explain why. For those who say, how can you say that? It's illegally occupied by Israel. This is Palestinian territory. What do you mean it's Palestinian territory? Okay, quick history lesson. The last sovereign state that existed in that territory that you call illegally occupied was a Jewish sovereign state thousands of years ago. Since then, empires and nations have conquered the land. They never made a sovereign state there, but they've conquered it. Most recently, the last empire to take control of it was the British Empire. Then it was they had to decide what they wanted to do with it. There were Arabs living there. Jews historically had a connection with it for thousands of years. They were forcefully displaced. Some Jews stayed there, but they always maintained a connection to it and a desire to want to return. So what do you do with it from a legal standpoint? Well, this land that we're talking about, the settlements area that's referred to as the Judea and Samaria or the West Bank, the international legal system you had at the time when the British government and British Empire was around was the League of Nations that was set up in the 1920s, the forerunner to the UN. And what did they say? They assigned the land, the whole of the land, for a future Jewish homeland. That's the last piece of international law you have on that front. So then when it came to 1947, the United Nations proposed, it didn't become binding law, but they proposed, let's split the land. Because we'll have a Jewish state and then we'll have an Arab state. There are Jews living there, there are Arabs living there. There had never been a prior Arab state or distinct national Arab identity, but there had been a Jewish one. The Arabs weren't demanding their own, national state or whatever. They just didn't want a Jewish one. So the Arabs come in and they try to all take chunks of the land and annihilate the Jewish state. But of course, they're not successful. So then what happens is you have Jordan controlling the West Bank and Egypt controlling, illegally occupying in both cases, Gaza. So they're both illegally occupying it. And then comes the 67 war, Israel, in fighting a defensive war, takes control of Gaza and Judea and Samaria. And then this is where people start to say, well, they're illegally occupying it. Who from? The Jordanians and the Egyptians. They didn't have the right to it. The Palestinians. There is no such international law that talks about a distinct Palestinian identity and grants them a plot of land. There's no binding international law that says that. So, on what basis does this territory not belong to the Jews? You have the fact that international law, when they took hold of it in 67, international law, the only precedent you had was the San Remo Conference of the League of Nations. You also had the fact that it was captured in a defensive war, and the United Nations recognizes that. It recognizes that right of self-defense. You also have, more recently, international law recognizing the right of indigenous peoples. And the Jewish people come from Judea. It's a biblical, historical connection that they have spanning thousands of years, way before Islam even existed. So when people say it's illegally occupied, who from? So the fact that Clinton calls it is a disputed territory, yes, that's right. That's the right terminology. Clinton himself actually recognized during his presidency and afterwards, he said in a speech, actually, he said he killed himself to get a deal. And it was Arafat, and Hillary Clinton says the same thing, it was Arafat who walked away. And he understands, I think they both understand and learn from that experience, that really what's always been going on here is not a desire for a self-determination by some kind of historic Palestinian identity. No. It's simply about wanting to get rid of the Jews and the Jewish state. That's what the cause has been about. Because if other Arab countries came in and took over the land or made it past their empire, there'd be no issue. The Palestinian leaders have said this themselves. Someone said to me recently, he said, Ollie, I get what you're saying, that, it's very new, this kind of Palestinian Arab identity. But, nationalisms can have to emerge at some point, don't they? To which I say, yes, that's a fair argument. And maybe then there'd be a discussion to be had about, whose right is it to the land. But the problem is that the whole national identity is not grounded in any genuine desire for self-determination. It's simply grounded in a cynical ploy to get rid of the Jewish state. And that's not legitimate. That's not a legitimate call for self-determination. That's just a call for genocide. It's a call for wiping out the Jews. And there are many reasons why they find it so objectionable to have the Jews there, because it's very threatening theologically. What does it mean that the Jews who are wandering the earth, seemingly forsaken by God, suddenly return to their land and re-establish their homeland? What does that say about Islam? And what does that say about Judaism? But either way, it's fascinating to see clips like this, because it shows us how much things have shifted against Israel in the upper spheres of high politics. But it's important to watch this because it should remind us that though we may have a totally different centre of gravity or Overton window of political discussion in the media and in politics, We shouldn't forget that things may change and conversations may change, but we should always be grounded in the truth. And watching this and seeing how much things have shifted should remind us that what we should be grounded in is only the truth. That's what counts. That's what matters. That's what is real. Thank you so much for watching. To watch another one, click here. To stay up to date with all our content, click here to subscribe. And if you're able to, you can help support JTV to grow and grow by clicking join below this video, where you can become a member and get perks including early access to videos and private live discussions with me. But most of all, you'll be partnering with us on our mission to change the world.